Ed Buck, Democratic mega donor, has finally been arrested for running a drug house and for injecting people with methamphetamine. How did it get to the point now where I think we're on the third person who has overdosed from drugs, I believe being injected, at this guy's house, and they are just now finally arresting this guy? You'd think after the first time they'd say, hey, something's weird here. Somebody overdosed in this dude's house. Perhaps we should investigate. No! Well, maybe they did. I don't know what they were doing. But then it happened again. And then finally it happened a third time, and it's like, okay, we'll arrest the guy. People have been complaining for a long time that this dude has been running drugs out of his house or whatever, and people are getting hurt. And it's only now, years later, they're actually arresting this guy. So here's the story from the New York Times. Ed Buck, Democratic donor, is charged with operating drug house. A third man suffered a methamphetamine overdose at the Los Angeles home of the longtime activist this week. So I just have to wonder why you have so many people overdosing and they're only now being like, oh yeah, we're going to charge him with running a drug house. Not the first time. Not the first time. He just keeps doing it. It makes me wonder about how law enforcement works in this country when you have a high-profile guy like this. Well, I'm sorry. Apparently the dude's rich. Now we get it, right? Well, let's read the news from the New York Times before we get started. However, head over to timcast.com/donate if you would like to support my work. There are multiple ways you can give, but the best thing you can do is share this video. YouTube's going to derank this video. They derank independent political commentary, but they can't derank your willingness to share it if you think I do a good job. So please consider it, but let's read the news. New York Times writes, Ed Buck, a Democratic donor and activist whose West Hollywood apartment was the scene of 2 methamphetamine overdose deaths since 2017, was arrested on Tuesday after investigators said a third man suffered an overdose in his home last week. So wait, they arrested him when? Like Tuesday, and the guy overdosed last week. Wow, even a delay on that. Now, I have to be fair. A lot of people think that the cops can just storm in and lock somebody up, but it may just be that since the first overdose, they've been investigating and trying to get evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that this guy was doing something wrong, and maybe it just took that long. Maybe the dude does a good job of cleaning up his tracks. I kind of don't think so, because there are photos of people going in and out of his house, and you could probably prove they're on drugs, but hey, far be it from me to tell law enforcement what they should or shouldn't be doing. They say, Mr. Buck, who has not faced charges for the earlier overdoses, but was subject to a wrongful death lawsuit, was charged on Tuesday with battery causing serious injury, administering methamphetamine, and maintaining a drug house. He faces up to 5 years and 8 months in prison. Is that all? Is that you know what, man? If he's facing 5 years and he's super rich, I bet you he's going to plead down and he's going to get probation or some kind of slap on the wrist. This is, Democratic mega donor. It's hard for me to say right now with a straight face, I don't think there's corruption in the Democratic Party, or at least in certain elements of it. Because when you see a story like this, you hear stories about people who commit petty offenses in the south side of Chicago get locked up for 10 years. Gang offenses locked up. Not only that, gun offenses. I know people in Chicago who get, a mandatory minimum for having drugs or having a weapon. And here we have a dude who is implicated in what, in my opinion, could be wrong, multiple deaths. Or overdoses, I'm sorry, not deaths. A couple deaths, I think, and overdoses. And that's it. 5 years. Wow. 3 people. But I guess if they're only charging him for the one person, the others can't be held against him. The charges relate only to the most recent incident. There it is. On September 11th, when the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office says Mr. Buck injected a 37-year-old man with methamphetamine in Mr. Buck's home. The man, who was not identified, survived the overdose. Families of the 2 men who died in his apartment, Timothy Dean, 55, died in January. Wow. While Gemmel Moore, 26, died in July 2017, have accused Mr. Buck, who is white, of preying upon black gay men. Letitia Nixon, the mother of Mr. Moore, said in the wrongful death lawsuit that Mr. Buck has had a, quote, well-documented history of isolating black men for predatory encounters. There's a censored word I can't read. It's YouTube. And crowds of protesters have gathered outside his home this year to demand justice for the men. And this is all they get. It's funny, isn't it? You can have the worst case. And you know what? No, I'm not going to get into it. There are a bunch of stories where we wonder why justice wasn't delivered. Okay? Especially when it comes to issues like Black Lives Matter. And I wonder now why. When you have black community activists coming out and saying this man is targeting them. He is targeting these young men. They are getting hurt. Nothing gets done for years. It's mind-blowing, isn't it, really? I got to admit, while I don't want to jump to conclusions, and I'm not much of a conspiracy person, I do, kind of side-eye the circumstances when a wealthy Democratic donor continually gets away with doing drugs, running a drug house, and having these people come and go, and they overdose 2 different people. And protesters show up demanding justice. Nothing happens. Nothing. And then finally, it's like, I imagine there's some cop who's like, we really don't want to go after these Democrats, but man, after 3 people, what do we do? Yeah, I'm just saying. Quote, I remain deeply concerned for the safety of people whose life circumstances may make them more vulnerable to criminal predators. Jackie Lacey, the Los Angeles County District Attorney, said in a statement. With this new evidence, I authorized the filing of criminal charges against Ed Buck. Now, I want to stress, I don't want to blame the cops or law enforcement necessarily, because if there is something nefarious going on, we don't necessarily know where it's coming from and why it's happening. It's entirely possible that the DA was just saying we have to have a rock solid case because the dude's wealthy and he's got connections. And if they don't have hard evidence, they could lose everything and the dude could get away with everything. So I don't know. I do think it's trying to. I don't want to lay accusations against anybody for not doing their job because we don't know. To be honest, we just don't know. And it would be kind of mean if it turns out law enforcement has been desperately trying to go after this guy, but he's got political connections, which he presumably does, and they were having trouble with it. So assuming the cops actually want to get this guy, I don't know. I'm just imagining being that law enforcement officer and really, you really want to bring this guy to justice, but you can't because of his political power and his wealth. And then all of a sudden some guy pops up on YouTube ragging on you for it. I don't know how or why. I know a lot of people believe there's like looking the other way going on. So I don't know where it's coming from. But I will stress, you'd think this guy would have been arrested a long time ago. 3 people now overdosing? Man. Fortunately, the 3rd guy survived, so that's great news. But at least now they've got this guy arrested. A lawyer for Mr. Buck, Seymour I. Amster, could not be reached on Tuesday, but has previously denied that Mr. Buck had any role in the 2 deaths. He just lets people into his house to do meth, I guess. Mr. Buck was scheduled to be arraigned on Wednesday, with prosecutors recommending $4 million bail. Yeah, which you can probably pay. The longtime activist has given more than $116,000 to Democratic candidates and groups over the past decade or so. It's actually not that much money, to be honest. The Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee told Fox News in January it donated Mr. Buck's contributions to the NALEO Educational Fund, a national bipartisan Latino group, while Representative Ted Lieu of California said he would donate $18,000 in contributions to civil rights organizations. Oh, so good on them. Good on them. Admittedly, look, I understand $116,000 is a lot of money, but over a decade? That means he's donating $16,000 a year, which is a lot of money to the average person, but I'm basing this off the fact the dude's wealthy. It's not like he's spending millions of dollars. Maybe. They say end group, so he doesn't sound like that big of a donor, to be honest. I've seen way bigger organizations, but perhaps as an individual, that must be a lot. Mr. Buck first rose to prominence in the 1980s when he led the Mecham Recall Committee, an effort to remove from office Governor Evan Mecham of Arizona. Mecham? Mr. Mecham, I don't know how to pronounce it, Mecham, would later be impeached, accused of fraud and perjury. Mr. Buck was also a prominent member of LGBT political circles. He was considered a suspect in Mr. Moore's death, but the police could not prove beyond a reasonable doubt that suspect Buck furnished drugs to Gemmell Moore, or that suspect Buck possessed drugs, according to court documents obtained by the Los Angeles Times. After Mr. Dean's death in January, Lieutenant Derek Alfred of the LA County Sheriff's Department told KTLA TV, a local television station, that it was suspicious that this has happened twice now. So we're going to conduct a thorough investigation to determine if it is criminal in nature. Wow, I gotta hand it to you, Mr. Buck. You kept going. You'd think after the police came out and said, we want to investigate this, we're looking for evidence, you'd stop. You'd be like, hey, you got too much heat on us. You can't be injecting methamphetamine in the house. And then he kept doing it. The wrongful death lawsuit said that Mr. Buck had introduced Mr. Moore to the drug. Wow. I have become addicted. So this is a quote. Mr. Moore said in a journal that he had become addicted to drugs, and the worst one at that. Ed Buck is the one to thank. He gave me my first injection. Mr. Moore added in the journal, "If it didn't hurt so bad, I'd kill myself, but wow. But I'll let Ed Buck do it for now." And how is he not charged? That's amazing. Well, he's charged now. So, I'll stress this point. It doesn't sound like he's that big of a donor if he only gave $116K. I mean, he's a consistent donor over the past decade. But keep that in mind. So what does that mean? He's making like 4 or 5 max contributions per year, if that. Which, yes, is a lot of money for the average person. But I'm thinking like this guy's a multimillionaire who's probably donating, hundreds of thousands per year to various groups. 100K, 116K, so he's doing like 10K a year for a decade. Yeah, I get it. It's a lot of money, but I think, I think the bigger question is, why did he keep doing it after the police announced they were going to go after him? And why couldn't they go after him with this journal where you had a statement from one of the victims? But I'll leave it at that. Stick around. Next segment will be coming up at 1 p.m. on this channel, and I will see you all then.